If you look at what the plein air artists did, the old folks, is they beautified the town. They gave themselves a beautiful place to paint. They didn't give themselves the terrain. The terrain was here. It was developed individually through, I don't remember exactly how many homesteads, Carol? 39 homesteads. Each one of them, that's why all the neighborhoods are so different. When you look at Woods Cove, if you look at Victoria Beach, if you look at Arch Beach or Bluebird Canyon or North Laguna or Irvine Cove, you'll see these different neighborhoods that look different because they were owned by different mini ranchers. And that gave, once the development texture started evolving in the community, that gave even greater spice in the scenery to be depicted in the paintings. And Laguna is recognized as having been founded by artists. It was, Norman St. Clair and William Lees Judson were the first two that brought students down from LA. St. Clair was an architectural draftsman that had a studio in Pasadena. Judson was the founding dean of the School of Fine Arts and Architecture at USC. And they actually are, they're the founders of the town. And that's been recognized. And the role of the current plein air, La Papa movement, is just to continue to carry on. This place isn't going to get any uglier. They can screw up the architecture, they can cut down unnecessarily a bunch more trees, but it really isn't. Laguna doesn't look, there's not any other areas. There are very few places along the California coast that have the exact combination of coastal shelf, 90-foot high cliffs in some areas, deeply incised canyons. It can't really be replicated. We're just lucky that that's the way that it was served up through geologic processes. But anyway, and then the other thing is, and this all culminates in the fact that, and some of you are well aware of this, Laguna Beach is the only city in the entire United States that's been declared by the National Park Service a National Historic Landscape.
Really?
Now that was the result of a small committee of people, including the person without whom it would have been possible, who's in this room, Tom Lamb, who had good connections with the ASLA, American Society of Landscape Architects, and the National Park Service to even bring their focus to this. But we had a little committee that kind of did all the footwork starting around 2017, I think, and by the time it was done, it was all fully documented, and it is all embedded in the Library of Congress. And why was it possible? It's because of what the early plein air artists did in founding and making this town. But it's not just that they were artists, they were also activists. If you look at, again, go back to Anna Hills, they all were involved in some sort of skirmish somewhere in town, whether it was a boundary dispute between homesteaders. Anna Hills, for example, served on a planning committee before we were an incorporated city. They didn't have a planning commission, they had a planning committee. She sat on that. She chaired the incorporation committee for the city. That means she's the mother of the city. She built the Presbyterian Church, basically, on Forest Avenue. She was the principal fundraiser for that. She handed out the trees. She was constantly promoting, and that's just one example. But if you go look, the artists were a big part of the Chamber of Commerce. They were politically connected, and they had a lot to do in the decision-making through the decades in town, such that it still looks the way it does. And that's the role that I'm looking to the plein air La Papa artists to continue in that role.
Thank you. We did a little mini intro for Tom Lamb.
It is, unless you have an unlimited checkbook
to be able to, which I didn't have. It's really difficult to make it. It's a small museum, independent museum. So I figured out that I had to affiliate with something bigger and better than me. Something with a big name that I don't have to explain, you know what I mean? Because Hilbert, nobody knew what Hilbert is. So I must have spent about 14 or 15 months, and all of a sudden it was Easter morning. And it was Monday, just after. It was Monday of Easter vacation. That's what it was. And I was at the office, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, why not Chapman University? So I went on my computer, and I looked to see if they had an art museum, and they didn't. So I found the telephone number, and I called the telephone call, and I called, and I got somebody on the line, but it was Easter vacation, so everybody was off. But as I just found out about 20 minutes ago, that it was Julie's husband that was on the other end of that line. I just found that out. He isn't here, is he? Otherwise, I'll blame him for all of this. Date night, okay. So, he passed the call over to the executive vice president, the lady in charge of fundraising, of course. And I left a message on her phone, and I said, every great university needs an art museum. And that's how it all started. So before long, I'm driving around in a little car, and Jim Doty saying, what about this place? What about this place? What about that? And looking at different locations. But we finally ended up across the street from the train station, which is great because it's not on the campus. It's off the campus and much more public facing. And so we were off and running. We got the museum opened, and they staffed it initially with some people from the art department that didn't know anything about running an art museum. In fact, when I go over there, they chase me away, and I got pretty tired of being chased away. So I went to the president, and I said, our relationship isn't working that well with Chapman. And he just about fell off his chair. He didn't know what to say, but he quickly recovered and says, well, what do we have to do? I have to hire my own staff, is what I said. And he said, okay, fine, who do you want? So I met this lady, Mary Platt, who'd been working at the museum, at the university in PR for how many years?
13 years.
13 years. And I asked her, we got to talking, and she tells me that she has a master's in art, and it's studied in Florence with the great masters. I thought, holy Toledo. I said, this is the gal for me. So I went back to the president and I said, I want to hire Mary. And he said, fine, I'll check to make sure it's not going to create any huge problems, but if not, you can have her for the museum. So that's how that happened.
It only caused a problem for the PR department when I left.
They really went downhill, that's for sure. But we went uphill because, Mary's done a really great job of running the museum and particularly helping us get the word out. Because I have certain goals in mind about the museum. One of the goals is that we want to have over 100,000 visitors a year. And so we're really pushing hard to be able to do that. We're not there yet. We're running about 60,000 a year, but we're going to continue to do things to try to get the word out. This year we were able to participate in the pageant of the masters. I would have been thrilled if they had picked one painting from our collection, but they ended up picking 4 paintings, plus the mosaic by Miller Sheets that's on the front of the museum. How many here have not been to the museum? I've got a few. Okay. I know it's hard to get out of Laguna Beach, but it's not that far. Well, we hope to see you sometime. Call me up, and I'd love to show it to you. So anyway, did I answer most of the questions?
I think you did. Yeah,
Okay,
thank you. Yeah, that was great. Now, Eric. Jessen down at the end there, Eric is sort of like Tony said, he's a celebrity in Laguna. He's an art historian. He's been here for a long time, making a career out of detecting the precise locations where the old guys painted. I know that Eric's also very involved in the OC Park Service and does a lot of work for them. And so Eric, if you could tell us a little bit about your background and then maybe talk about what sort of art detective work you do and maybe some examples of some of your most interesting discoveries while on your art detective journey.
Thank you, Celeste. Actually, let's go back to when the old guys, I'll call them, the early plein air artists, started moving here around 1900, 1905, 1910. It's hard to imagine, but Laguna looked like Camp Pendleton does off the I-freeway. There were no trees. It was barren coastal shelf. Had been grazed. Wasn't much to look at. There was rich terrain, richly textured terrain. And so what did one of the co-founders of the Laguna Beach Art Association, Anna Hills, do? She procured 700 Monterey cypress saplings and passed them out to people all over town and said, stick these in the ground. And they made the city beautiful so that they could paint it. And when you couple that with the requirement of the homesteaders to plant eucalyptus groves, what would Laguna have ever looked like without eucalyptus? What would Santa Barbara look like? What would Pasadena look like? The same kinds of things, the emergence of the urban forest. So they essentially beautified the canvas before they started painting their own. And one of the things that I was thinking about in kind of comparing and contrasting the old folks from today's La Papa artists is that the old folks, their painting careers started right on the heel of the Gilded Age. They had wealthy clients who had a lot of wall space in really big houses, and they painted, in many cases, some really big canvases. Their studies, of course, on site would have been smaller, but you know, you look at today and what the plein air artists of today are doing. I look at it as if they're democratizing the access of art to the general public, because not only are they painting smaller paintings, they are affordable, they're more widely disseminated among the population, and more regular run-of-the-mill households can collect art at a micro scale compared to the old guys. But that's one of the kind of comparisons that I see. The other thing is that they both did, both schools, the old and the new, is they still ran around painting scenes. In fact, driving over here, I spotted a plein air artist at the top of 3rd Street Hill, painting a painting looking down 3rd Street Hill. And you know, they're both engaged in the same process. But the one thing I wanted to encourage you, because I'm not sure what this audience is, but I assume that you are La Papa artists. A lot of you are. I don't know for sure, but I just wanted to encourage you. When you look at the works of the old folks, they picked the very best subject matter. Whether it was an obscure rock formation or a garden gate or a panoramic landscape scene, they picked the best possible composition and subject matter. And I wanted to encourage, and I see that in the current works. In fact, Carrie Conklin and I spent a good part of Sunday afternoon after the Rotary Classic Car Show downtown at the La Papa Gallery studying, you know, what was there. And I remember Mark Jacobucci, who's active with you guys today. Mark, 1,000 years ago, was a landscape architect for the Irvine Company. And he used to come in to see me when I was a county department head in Orange County. And I would, you know, say, no, you're not planting enough Torrey pines, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, on the Irvine Ranch. But anyway, it's just marvelous to see people step out. I was visiting with a gentleman here this morning this afternoon that just recently sold his dental practice at age 50 because he's decided he wants to be an artist. We're looking forward to a question from him when we have Q&A. So, you know, there's that kind of stuff that was going on. The thing that I also feel is that because the old folks saw to it that a lot of trees were planted, we have a lot of issues in town regarding the tree huggers versus the view people and all that kind of thing. And if the plein air artists might want to consider involving themselves in the policy making of the city regarding the management of its landscape so that they continue to have beautiful landscapes to paint. Okay. Now, as far as art detective, I don't know, my great-grandfather and his brother came to Santa Ana in 1869 from Denmark and started building farm equipment for James Irvine and eventually carriages and later automobiles and that kind of thing. And by some hook or by crook, I wound up and still do work for individual members of the Irvine family since I have been retired for the last 22 years. But even before I retired, if it wasn't for Joan Irvine Smith, I wouldn't be sitting here because a lot of you may not know the story, but in 1978, when the Irvine family finally emotionally brought themselves to the point where they could stomach or even conceive of selling the ranch that they had owned since, time began, basically, in South Orange County, there was individual members of the family had so many shares in the company, and Joan and her mother Atherley had the largest percentage, which is 11%, and they didn't like the amount that Donald Bren was willing to pay them, or the consortium that Donald Bren bought out. And so they held out for about 10 years, and there was litigation that went on. Actually, when Bren took over the company, there was litigation. Everybody knows that Joan was a spicy girl, and she could fight her own battles really well. And eventually they reached a settlement, and she got a few $100 million, and what did she do? There was hardly any market for plein air art. I mean, many of us obscure geeks loved it if we're Laguna tree huggers, but she went out and started buying everything she could get her hands on, and she literally fired up the market and rebirthed the plein air, the historic plein air arts movement. And there was a woman, Dr. Patricia Trenton, who was a highly revered PhD from the Chicago Art Institute that lived in Century City, that did a lot of work for museums and curation and stuff, and she tapped me to start to see. She wanted me to find all the spots where Joseph Kleitch painted his paintings, in the canyons and in Laguna Beach. Most of it was pretty easy. There was one canvas that took 4 years to solve. Then I got the assignment from the Crocker to do Edgar Payne's canvases in the backcountry of the Eastern Sierra, 13 canvases requiring 362 miles of hiking. And I was way too old for that, so I have a wonderful young mountaineer colleague, Gregory Horvath from La Jolla, who just scaled El Capitan last May. He's a climber, but he goes with me, and we've had some real interesting assignments. We did the Payne, we did a lot of other of the plein air artists, and then occasionally I would get contacted by either Bonhams or collectors, dealers or museums. There was one interesting one where it was a step up. It was a Alfred Beardstadt painting from the Hudson River School, painted mistitled Mount St. Helens in the Oregon Territory before the state of Washington was created. And it wasn't, it was another of the volcanoes in the thing, and I had to study that situation. That was a painting that was going up for at a range of auction from 5 to 700,000. And then the most fun assignment didn't have anything to do with finding the spots on the ground. The Jarvis family contacted me and asked me to coordinate and strategize the sale of the Old Coast Road by William Wendt, which is the granddaddy of all the paintings. And they had owned it for 99 years. It lived right around the corner here on Cliff Drive, right across from Lawn Bowling. boiling in the hot sun through those windows, had cracklery, had to be restored a few times. But they acquired the painting from Wendt in 1916 in return for building materials because they owned the Laguna Lumber Company. They traded the painting for building materials for Wendt to build his fabulous home in Art Studio, which still stands on Arch Street. So they had decided it was time for a new owner. So we came up with a strategy. Everybody in the art community knew who owned that painting, but whenever it was exhibited or published, it always said private collection, as you know, so as to not disclose who's the owner. And so we selected a couple of other paintings that they had in their home and put them up for auction at Bonham's and disclosed that it was the Jars collection, intentionally creating an appetite. So a year and a half later, the painting went up for auction on Sunset Boulevard, and it sold for $1.6 million, including the buyer's premium. Now, the reason why I mention prices isn't to brag. I'm mentioning the prices because all of you people who are painting today have no concept of how much your work is going to sell for a long time from now. And that's just the way the investment curve works. And so with that, you have my encouragement. And the way that I find the spots is when I graduated from high school, there was no UCI, there was no freeway. If you lived in Laguna, you went to Long Beach State or you went to Fullerton. Well, air quality was terrible in Fullerton, so I decided I'd go to Long Beach State. I just drove up Coast Highway. And I was a business major, but I really didn't like it. I took some geography classes and just fell in love with it. And so I got my undergraduate degree in physical geography, which is terrain. And so I'm trained in studying terrain, and whether it's valleys or canyons or shorelines or volcanoes or whatever. And then my biogeography, which is the distribution of native plant communities, was the graduate school work. So when I'm given a painting by Edgar Payne that was titled Rugged Slope and Tamarack, it was mischaracterized as having been painted at a place called Tamarack Lake, which is down by Mineral King in the southwestern Sierra, when in fact it was the South Fork of Big Pine Creek, where he did 7 canvases. His heaviest concentration of canvases in the Sierra was up Big Pine Creek. That one took 4 years. So anyway, I'll stop rambling now.
I always try to catch Eric's lectures. He lectures here at the museum, and I've listened to you tell the story about the sale of Old Coast Road before. I'm glad you brought it up because I just think it's fascinating. And we could listen to Eric all night, but I'd love to hear from all of the experts on our panel here. So I have a few questions I want to get to, and so I'm just gonna kind of move down the line, and I'm gonna start. Kelly, you can answer first. Why is the plein air movement important to art history? Just give us your best guess.
I was hoping you'd ask me, what do you think they would think about when they looked at the town, and I was going to say they'd be disgusted.
Well, I knew that would be your answer, so I instead asked you what you think they'd choose to paint.
Well, because there's trash now today. The beauty about plein air, with the exception of a couple like Edgar Payne that drove me nuts, because he would paint scenes in the Sierras and import lakes and plant trees above the timberline and stuff. But most of the plein air, I was spoiled. Kleitch painted exactly what he saw, and most of the plein air artists did. And I was screaming about Payne when I was working on Payne, and my mother was slapping me in the face because she was a regional artist, and she said, "That's artistic license, you just shut up. She's entitled to do whatever he wants." Okay? So, but I lost my train of thought.
What do you think that they would paint if they were here today and saw what Laguna looked like?
I don't know that they would include the trash bins, or the stoplights, or the power lines, because, well, there were some power lines in some of the early ones and stuff, but I guess they would just be bored to death going around painting the same stuff that they'd already painted. Because what else is there to do unless they want to, hire a man-carrying drone and go up in the sky and do it obliquely or something? I'm not really qualified to answer that one.
I think you are, but that's okay, you can pass.
Well, wait a minute, I'd like to make a comment
Okay.
about that. I mean, different artists were different in the old guys. I mean, Kleitsch in particular was a complete oddball in that, I mean, he was really a pseudo-modernist. I mean, he was more like Matisse. And I don't know if he got along with Wendt or not, but Wendt was sort of this sober Lutheran who really didn't suffer modernism. For him, nature was God, and he was painting God. And his paintings are characterized by these beautiful landscapes with sometimes a very diminutive man-made structure, and God and man. And it's really interesting. Kleitsch was completely about face. I mean, Kleitsch, he rarely painted. I mean, he painted the coastline because he had to make a living, but he didn't want to paint the coastline. He wanted to turn away from the coastline, and he would look at the town, and he would paint the city and the people, much like a scene painter, but was a great, he was a great oil painter. So I think today, Kleitsch